Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be going over the 85s, which is a paper version of a lab that we're going to be doing in the future. So there are some notes up at the top that we'll understand a little bit more when I start talking about the next couple slides. I do want you to know that this can be a frustrating exercise. I do want you to know that there's an answer to each of these problems as we're going through it. I want you to be able to feel free to write whatever you need to write on these sheets of paper to keep things straight. We're going to be doing this lab in a couple days, and this will actually build your tolerance for frustration, which you might experience a little bit during the ACT. So what we have here on the top, all of this up here is reference data. So this was data that was collected and recorded into a sort of a data table up above. So we have our chemicals over here. So we have HCl over here, CaS, calcium sulfide. Calcium sulfide's also found over here. Then we got silver nitrate here and silver nitrate here. And so what's happening is, like for this very top one, we're putting some HCl with some PbClO3, putting those two together, and we get a white precipitate out of them. And then when we put some potassium carbonate and some CaS together, we get a white precipitate. So it's recording all of the interactions between these various chemicals. That's what's going on. So what you look for, and this is stated at the very top of your sheet, you look for a unique interaction. And for me, black precipitate's a unique interaction. Thick white precipitate, light yellow, blue, those are the ones that are unique. Gray would be one, but there seems like there's two grays on here, so I'm probably going to leave that off at this point in time. So those are all my unique interactions between the chemicals. I'm going to start off with the black precipitate. You could start off with any of the other ones that I circled. So this black precipitate is formed when these two chemicals are put together. So I go down to my actual data. So this is the data that I would be collecting in the lab. I don't know what the 6 bottles are. I don't know what A, B, C, D, all the way down. I don't know what those are. I know they're these chemicals right here. I know that they're all these chemicals up here, but I don't know which bottle is which. And that's what you're going to try to find out on paper first. And then we'll put the actual bottles in your hands and see if you can figure out what's in the bottles. So again, that's my unique particular one. So my unique interaction is right here. So right now, E is either this lead compound or this calcium compound. So I'm going to write both of them. So PbClO3 and calcium sulfide. E right now could be either one of those. And F could be either one of them as well. And I'm just going to write Pb because I don't really have the room to go any further. So now what we do is we look for those two and we say, is there any other unique things that happen with those two? Well, if I go down the line here, the lead compound makes a white precipitate, a black precipitate, no reaction, a thick white precipitate. That's unique. So does F or does E make a thick white precipitate? And if I look, right here's my thick white precipitate. So whatever A is and whatever F is, that makes a thick white precipitate. That tells me that F has to be our lead compound, and E is going to be calcium sulfide. So F and A make a thick white precipitate. What is it that makes a white precipitate with lead? That would be my sulfuric acid. So that's H2SO4. So right now I know 3 of the bottles. So I go down to A, H2SO4, and E is calcium sulfide, and F is PbClO3 2. So I know those particular substances. If I'm looking here, so I got H2SO4 written here for A. And I go down and I see, well, under this H2SO4, there's a blue precipitate. So I go up to my top. I'm going to find my H2SO4. I'm going to find that blue precipitate. The blue precipitate's right here. Here's my H2SO4. And it makes a blue precipitate with calcium sulfide. All right, that makes sense because those two make it. So it shows me that I did these 3 correctly because I have data that backs it up. So I'm going to erase that a little bit. Now I'm going to look for some other things. H2SO4 makes a gray precipitate with something. So I'm going to go up to my top data. Look at H2SO4 and look at this gray precipitate that forms. So H2SO4 makes a gray precipitate with silver nitrate. So H2SO4 makes a gray precipitate with silver nitrate. And I'm going to write that up here as well, AgNO3. It's just a unique data table, so C shows up in 2 spots. So that's AgNO3. So now I know most of the things that are in my table. Let's see here. I go back up to the top, and I'm looking at that sulfuric acid. And let's see, what else can I find out? I'm noticing that sulfuric acid makes bubbles with D. So sulfuric acid's here, sulfuric acid's here. It makes bubbles with that compound. So D must be K2CO3. K2CO3. That tells me that. And K2CO3 makes bubbles with something else. So let's take a look here. It makes bubbles right there, and it makes those bubbles with HCl. So HCl would go there. HCl would go there. So I have everything filled out. I can cross-reference and take a look at that to figure out what's going on. So that is how you do the first one. Yes, it can be extremely frustrating. It takes time. Figure out one, figure out the next thing, problem solve your way through it. Show yourself that you can actually do this. All right, so now let's do another one. Oh, there's the correct answers, by the way, so you can take one more look at them. So with this one, I want you to see if you can figure anything out before we start. So pause the video. Maybe figure out what's the unique item that's up there, and then try to figure that out as we're going along. Well, hopefully you did pause the video. So the unique one that's up here, I think, is the green precipitate. That's made when silver nitrate comes in contact with potassium bromide. So I go down here, I see my green precipitate. So right now, this C could be KBr. And it could be AgNO3. We don't know which one it is. And same thing with F. It could be the silver or it could be the potassium bromide. We just don't know which one it is. So if I look at the KBr, I see that there is no reaction there, no reaction there, no reaction there, no reaction there. So C has a reaction, no reaction. Go down here, it's got a white precipitate, no reaction. I do not think that C is KBr. Let's look at F right here. It's got no reaction, no reaction, no reaction, no reaction. Well, based on the data on top, F must be KBr. So F is KBr. I go down here into my table, KBr. And again, that green precipitate was between KBr and silver nitrate, so C must be silver nitrate. And I'm going to write silver nitrate in there as well. All right, so pause the video, see if you can find the next set. So based on that information, what can you find out next? All right, so let's look up on the top. I see those gas bubbles. Those are kind of unique. So there's gas bubbles, and here there's gas bubbles. And so there's gas bubbles made there, and there's gas bubbles made there. And in both instances, gas bubbles are made when potassium carbonate is available. So potassium carbonate is involved in both times where there's gas bubbles. And if we look at this chart on the bottom, there's gas bubbles twice. So what must A be? A must be K2CO3. K2CO3. All right. So we got some things, and we can look here. We say we got this one is AgNO3, and it makes a white precipitate with K2CO3. So if we go up to the top, silver nitrate, potassium carbonate, they do in fact make a white precipitate. So that just backs up some of our choices. So I'm going to erase that. Make sure I got my table filled out. K2CO3 is A, so that's all the way in there. Erase a little bit more. And I want you to think about what might be your next step. All right, so if I look up here at barium nitrate, I don't know which one's the barium nitrate yet, but if I look, I see a white precipitate, a no reaction. Barium nitrate's right here, and I see two no reactions, and I see a white precipitate. So I see two white precipitates and three no reactions. So let's take a look here. F, a lot of no reactions. E, get bubbles. All right, that doesn't help us out. That's not barium nitrate. D gives us bubbles. That's not it. C, we already know. B gives us a white precipitate. And B gives us no reaction, white precipitate, no reaction. So I'm thinking B is barium nitrate because white precipitate, and then three no reactions. So that's how I figure out which one is barium nitrate. Write that down here as well. BaNO3, 2. All right, so I got them almost all figured out. Let's see, what would be our next step? Well, barium nitrate, if we go up to the top here, and there's many ways to figure this stuff out, folks, so I'm just following one path. Barium nitrate makes a white precipitate with potassium carbonate, so that's that white precipitate. So potassium carbonate and barium nitrate makes that white precipitate. So what makes the other white precipitate? So barium nitrate makes another white precipitate, but with what? So it's not this one. It's this white precipitate right here. What makes that? Well, that's when sulfuric acid, H2SO4, and barium nitrate come together. So if we look here, what makes that white precipitate? Well, it's going to be the barium nitrate and the H2SO4. So D is H2SO4. Goes right there. I forgot to write B in here. This is barium nitrate. That goes in there as well. So that's how I find out the sulfuric acid. I look at a couple other things. Up here, sulfuric acid and potassium carbonate make bubbles. So I go up here, potassium carbonate and sulfuric acid make bubbles. So that just confirms what I found out. All right, so we got one more to figure out, it looks like. We got E to figure out. So what makes gas bubbles and a white precipitate with silver nitrate? So silver nitrate, you got a white precipitate, So we already figured out the K2CO3 and silver nitrate make a white precipitate. So what makes the other one? It must be silver nitrate and the hydrochloric acid. So here's my white precipitate. What's the other part? That must be the HCl. And HCl makes gas bubbles with potassium carbonate. And if we look here, it makes gas bubbles with potassium carbonate. So that is HCl. All right, so the next two are all on your own to see if you're able to come up with them on your own. So there's the correct answers. So try to do this.